Hey, good morning, friends, and welcome to Bible Study Live with Matt. I'm Matt, and today we're going to talk about, does the Bible give clear instructions for marriage? A lot of people who maybe aren't familiar with the scriptures have this picture in their mind that the Bible talks about a woman being subservient and the man being the ruler of the home. And frankly, that's not at all what the Bible teaches. Today we're going to look at, what does a biblical marriage look like? What do the scriptures say about how a husband should be treating his wife and how a wife should treat her husband? Now, if you've been paying attention to any of my social, you'll know that my wife and I have a book called For This Reason coming out in March. And in this book, we talk about living in Ephesians 5 marriage. If you want to get an advanced copy of that book before it's available to everybody else and be able to download it, read it yourself, you can text the word love to 833-981-0002. Stay in your messaging, rates apply. Now, give me 1 second. I'm going to mute my mic because I have to cough, and then I'll dig into the study. All right, I figured you'd rather unmute you than hack into this awesome wireless microphone. Okay, do me a favor, wherever you're watching from, drop me a note, say hello in the comments, and that way I can say hi back to you. But without further ado, I'm going to pop the verse on the screen, and let's get to read. And let me just drop that down there. All right. I'm going to read through all of Ephesians chapter 5, and here's why. It's not a very long chapter, but the reason I want to read the whole thing is because what it says about husbands and wives ties back into the things it hits before that. So let's go ahead and dig in. By the way, I'm reading from the Message. Listen, whatever translation you're reading from, they're telling the same story, okay? I love the way Eugene Peterson paraphrased the scriptures, translated the scriptures with the Message. I think it seems to hit what the original Greek text was aiming at, and it's just communicated in a beautiful, readable way. So we'll read through the whole thing, and then I'm going to go back through and break it down. So let's dig in. The whole goal, of course, is to create conversation without condemnation. So drop your comments in the chat. And, oh, hello, my beautiful wife watching from Ontario, Oregon. I love you. All right, let's dig in. Watch what God does, and then you do it. Like children who learn proper behavior from their parents, mostly what God does is love you. Keep company with him and learn a life of love. Observe how Christ loved us. His love was not cautious, but extravagant. He didn't love in order to get something from us, but to give everything of himself to us. Love like that. And we can just stop right there and say, there you go. That's how a husband should love his wife. That's how a wife should love her husband. But we're not done, because Paul wasn't done. So let's keep going. Don't allow love to turn into lust, setting off a downhill slide into sexual promiscuity, filthy practices, or bullying greed. Though some tongues just love the taste of gossip, those who follow Jesus have better uses for language than that. Don't talk dirty or silly. That kind of talk doesn't fit our style. Thanksgiving is our dialect. You can be sure, morning eyes. You can be sure that using people or religion or things just for what you can get out of them, the usual variations of idolatry, will get you nowhere, and certainly nowhere near the kingdom of Christ, the kingdom of God. Don't let yourselves get taken by religious smooth talk. God gets furious with people who are full of religious sales talk but want nothing to do with him. Okay, I'm going to pause right there. Oh, don't even hang around with people like that. I'm going to pause right there because this is an important one. Okay, and this ties into marriage. So nope, actually, I'm not going to pause right there. Oh, as much as I want to, I need to read the whole thing so it'll make sense in context. Sorry. Verse 8, you groped your way through that murk once, but no longer. You're out in the open now. The bright light of Christ makes your way plain. So no more stumbling around. Get on with it. The good, the right, the true. These are the actions appropriate for daylight hours. Figure out what will please Christ, then do it. Don't waste time on useless work, mere busy work, the barren pursuits of darkness. Expose these things for the sham they are. It's a scandal when people waste their lives on things they must do in the darkness where no one will see. Rip the cover off those frauds and see how attractive they look in the light of Christ. Wake up from your sleep, climb out of your coffins. Christ will show you the light. So watch your step, use your head, make the most out of every chance you get. These are desperate times. Don't live carelessly, unthinkingly. Make sure you understand what the master wants. Don't drink too much wine. That cheapens your life. Drink the Spirit of God, huge drafts of Him. Sing hymns instead of drinking songs. Sing songs from your heart to Christ. Sing praises over everything. Any excuse for a song to God the Father in the name of our Master Jesus. So Paul's building up, before he dives into relationships, Paul builds up some important things. He starts this part of the letter to the church in Ephesus by saying, watch what God does, then you do it. You want to talk about how to live a great marriage? Watch what God does and then do it. What did God do? God loved the world so much that He gave it so many chances. He gives us so much mercy. He gives us so much grace. God loves us so much that He chose to love us before we even choose to love Him back the right way. Before we choose to love Him back at all, He chose to love us. So before Paul even starts talking about the relationships with one another, he spends time saying, let's focus on your relationship with God. So the first thing to live a great marriage, make sure you're being a great husband or a great wife, is look what God does. Focus your attention on God. You can't be a great husband if God isn't first place in your life. See, because if God is first place, you emulate God and you love your spouse the way that God intends for you to love your spouse. But you can only do it if you're putting God first in your life too. If you're not putting God first in your life as a husband, you're never going to be the best possible husband you can be. And ladies, the same goes for you. If God isn't number one in your life, you can't be the wife, the best wife that God intended for you to be. That's just how it works. I'm grateful. Like, my wife puts God before me. God comes before me. If I go off the rails, if I do something stupid, if I were to just try and lead our family down a bad path, which, God willing, I won't make those stupid choices. But if I were to do that, my wife would call me out on it. She would put following God first. And by doing that, she could lovingly guide me back in the right direction. The same should go for me. So let's continue, though, in our reading of Ephesians. Before we get into the relationships part of the letter, Paul also says this in verse 5. People that are using religion or things just for what you can get out of them, usual variations of idolatry, that will get you nowhere, certainly nowhere near the kingdom of Christ and God. The verses I'm about to read in the book of Ephesians, some people in churches have misused these verses. They've played pick a verse and misused the scripture I'm about to dig into to make women subservient, to act like women need to wait on their man hand and foot, to say that a woman can't have a job, a career, or anything she wants because she has to be subservient to her husband. And that is simply and purely not what I'm about to read is saying. And this is why I wanted to read the first part of Ephesians chapter 5 first, because it is critical that we get into that and understand that before we read these next verses. Because I've literally had people say, well, those verses are misogynistic. Well, they would be if you don't understand what you're reading, B, if you don't look at the original text, and C, if you're just going into the reading with the assumption, I want to find some way to twist these words to make them bad. So I wanted to start with this because Paul is writing to men and women in this writing, and the very first thing he says to both of them is, watch what God does, then you do it. So what I'm about to read is a call out to husbands and wives about how to love one another well. And what did my wife say? God needs to be first for me and close in my life so I can see you as God does. Bingo. Man, I'm so grateful I have such an awesome wife. Okay, so we went through this stuff, and Paul's saying, like, listen, wake up from your sleep, climb out of your coffins. What is that symbolism? He's saying, look, wake up. You're no longer dead and living in the sin of your lives. Christ will show you the light. So following Jesus will show you the right way to love your spouse. Now let's dig into the relationships portion. He also warns against, like, don't get drunk and things like that before digging into relationships. Why do we do that? Because listen, if your mind's not clear and your head's not clear, you can't lovingly care for your spouse. You can't protect them. You can't keep them safe. You can't show them the love they deserve if you're a slop-a-potamus drunk. That's just, Paul, like, he doesn't mix words. He just digs into the dirt. And I love that about the way he writes, because he's like, look, whether it's going to be popular opinion or not, I'm going to show you the best way to live. And this is what I love about God. See, the scriptures share with us the best way to live, but God gives us free will to follow it or not. You want to be a crap husband? You have free will to do it. You want to be a crap wife? You have free will to do it. But Paul paints a picture of why you don't want to do that and why you want to choose to be a great husband or wife. And let's look at why. Verse 21, out of respect for Christ, be courteously reverent to one another. So as Paul gets into relationships, the first thing he says is, because Jesus matters to you, the way you treat your spouse should also be important. Because Jesus matters, the way you treat your spouse should matter to you. That's literally the way Paul starts out the relationship segment. He sets the stage for both husband and wife. Now, other translations say, wives, submit to your husbands. I think Eugene Peterson does a great job in the way that he words this, because in our Western minds, when we hear the word submit, a couple things come to mind. One, for me, from combat sports for years, submission is a way to overpower somebody to get what you want, to get them to tap out, to get them to quit, to get them to realize you're dominant, right? So in our Western mind, submission comes with a couple preconceived notions. Either one, making someone quit, making someone submit themselves to you. Or we get like 50 Shades of Grey, right? When we think of submission, we think like handcuffs, whips, and debauchery. So I can see why and understand why when people in 2022 read certain translations of the Bible and they read the word submit, they're reading it through the lens of what they've learned through culture, what they've learned through their life. And that's not what the original writings intended. This wasn't intended to say, hey, husbands, lord power over your wives. That being said, it makes sense why we would misunderstand it, because right in the book of Genesis, when the fall happens, and God is saying, here's the consequence of you guys doing the stupid stuff I told you not to do. He said, ladies, you're going to long for the love of your husband, and a man is going to see that you want love in return so bad, he's going to lord it over you. Right in the beginning of the story, when the fall happens, we see that one of the consequences is that relationship not only is broken with God, but the way we relate with one another is broken. And men and women are going to have unhealthy things in their relationships. They're going to have an unhealthy perspective. Paul is trying to bring that back full circle to say, let's get back to how these relationships were intended to be from the beginning. So here we go. Wives, understand and support your husbands in ways that show respect for Christ. The husband provides leadership to his wife in the way that Christ does to his church, not by domineering, but by cherishing. So just as a church submits to Christ as he exercises leadership, wives should likewise submit to their husbands. Husbands, go all out in your love for your wives, exactly as Christ did for the church. A love marked by giving, not getting. Christ's love makes the church whole. His words evoke her beauty. Everything he does and says is designed to bring the best out in her, dressing her in dazzling white silk, radiant with holiness. And that is how husbands ought to love their wives. They're really doing themselves a favor since they're already one in marriage. No one abuses his own body, does he? No, he feeds it and pampers it, and that's how Christ treats us, the church, since we're part of his body, and this is why a man leaves father and mother and cherishes his wife. No longer two, they become one flesh. This is a huge mystery, and I don't pretend to understand it all. What is clearest to me is the way Christ treats the church. And this provides a good picture of how each husband is to treat his wife, loving himself in loving her. Wow, that's a lot to unpack. So let's unpack it. First, wives, understand and support your husbands in the way that shows support for Christ. And he explains how to do that. Okay, so basically, let's think of it this way. When I, as a man, when you as a woman, doesn't matter, when we make the choice to say, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. There wasn't some magic power that came over us that forced us to follow like a robot. I'm going to follow you. That's not how it went down. When we make the choice to follow Christ, we say, I'm going to trust that you love me enough to lead me in the best way to live this life, Jesus. I'm going to trust you enough right? Because Jesus came, he wasn't just our Savior. He wasn't just our Messiah. He wasn't just rabbi, teacher. He was all of it. He is all of it. And by saying, I'm going to follow you, Jesus, I'm saying, I trust that you love me enough to lead me in the right direction. And Paul is starting this by saying, hey, wives, and why would Paul have to point this out? Let me just break it down. Because once Jesus came on the scene and people realized the freedom in Christ, there was a lot of, this is like Paul's empowering women. In this day and age, women were looked at property. They were mistreated. They were thrown out. They were used. They were abused. There was horrible treatment of women. And Paul is actually, through this letter, empowering them. See, because he didn't just say, women, you're a woman, you're second class, you're obligated to listen to your husband. Which, by the way, society did say. The world did say. So it's funny because in 2022, people look at the Bible and say, that's so oppressive. Really? Because in the culture of Rome and the Hebrew culture back then, women were property of their men. And Paul, in a progressive way, he's pleading with women to say, please, out of understanding and support for your husbands in ways that show support for Jesus, that's what you need to do to be a good wife. Understand him. Understand what he's doing. Get to know your husband. This is no longer just like some arranged marriage deal or your dad traded some goats for you. Get to know your husband. Understand and support him the same way, in such a way that it shows your support for Christ. He says, look, the husband is providing leadership to his wife the way Christ does to the church. So Paul, when he says this, because he's writing to a church of people that say they're following Jesus, he's running with the assumption that, ladies, make the choice to follow your husband because your husband is making the choice to follow Jesus. And at that time, of course, the way the teaching, the education, and things worked, it did flow through the husband. It's just how it was culturally, and we need to kind of come to grips with that in 2022 and not get butthurt about it. In their culture, that's where it came through. The leadership came through the husband. The teaching came through the husband. That's how, like, the learning came through. So he's saying, look, your husband is being taught to follow Jesus. So trust him and follow him. Okay? That is what Paul's saying. And he's saying, and even in writing to the women, it's kind of like, I don't want to say passive-aggressive, but he's passively speaking to the husbands too, because he says, the husband provides leadership to the wife in the way that Christ does the church, not by domineering, but cherishing. So he's reassuring ladies, follow your husband. He's not going to order you around and boss you around. He is going to lovingly cherish you. What did Christ do for the church? He laid his life down for us. What did he do? He came in peace. He came and loved us in our most unlovable time. He showed us grace and mercy when we didn't deserve it, when we flew off the handle, when we ignored him, when we gave God the silent treatment, right? When we do all the things that we crappily do in relationships, we've done it with God. And Paul is saying, in the same way that you submit to God now, submit to your husband too. Trust him too. Because your husband, he is going to lay his life down for you. If he's following Jesus, he's going to put you before himself. He's going to put your needs before his needs. He is going to put your life before his life. And that's a guy worth following. That's how Paul starts this off. He's literally, as he's talking to the wives, he is also talking to the husbands to say, this is the guy you got to be, though. That's the tough one. This is the guy you gotta be, though. Paul is saying, you want a wife to respect you like that? You want your wife to follow you like that? Be a man worth respecting and following. And that's why he goes on to say this. Husbands, go all out in your love for your wives, exactly as Christ did for the church. What does going all out mean? He put on skin, set aside his deity, came to this earth, was mistreated, and still continued to love. Was lied about, still continued to love. Was abused, still continued to love. And Paul is saying, husbands, this is how you are to be with your wife. On her worst days, when she doesn't show you love, when she's angry with you, when she mistreats you, when she has the worst day of her life, you are to be willing to lay your life down for her. But even before all the, if things go crappy in your marriage stuff, Paul's saying, listen, here's the deal. Here's how you know if you're being a husband that's following Christ. You have a love marked by giving, not getting. A love marked by giving, not getting. Imagine what a marriage would look like. Come on, let's just do this. Imagine what a marriage today would look like if husbands only cared. If husbands only cared about loving their wife and putting her first. Imagine how many more marriages in America would survive today if husbands said, I'm going to put my wife before me in all things. I love her, what she wants, what she needs. What she wants for dinner, I'm in. What she wants to watch on TV, I'm in. The movie she wants to go to, I'm in. The things that please her when we're intimate, I'm in. If husbands were focused on pleasing their wives, loving their wives, not pleasing like if a wife goes down a path that's a sinful path. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if as a husband, every single thing you do is to show your wife that she matters more than everything, how would wives respond to that? And if wives did the same, if in her mind it's like, but whatever he wants to eat, I'm in. Whatever he wants to watch, I'm in. Whatever movie he wants to go to, I'm in. Whatever he wants to do intimacy-wise, so long as it's not like, abusive or bad or whatever, I'm in too. If husbands and wives, if we all focused on what I want more than anything is to make you feel loved and pleased. If both of us had that mindset, how could a marriage go wrong? See, because if a woman knows every day that she is the most important thing in her husband's life, the most beautiful woman he's ever laid eyes on, the only woman he's ever going to have eyes for, if as a wife she knew she was loved, protected, cared for, and that never would there be a moment that someone else would be chosen over her, would she ever have a reason to doubt her husband or want to leave him? No. And if a husband felt like the most important thing in the world to his wife, if he felt like she only has eyes for him and will only ever have eyes for him, if he felt like she wanted nothing more than to make his life great too, would he ever want to leave her? Would he ever want to stare at some chick walking by? Of course not. See, if husbands and wives were to literally put each other first and make each other their number one priority after God, we wouldn't have a country that has a divorce rate that's over 50%. We wouldn't have so many broken homes. We wouldn't have so many kids being raised by a single parent. I think we'd probably have a whole lot less of everything bad in this world if husbands and wives would just learn to love one another as Christ loves the church. Now, Paul does go on and he paints this beautiful picture about the way a husband treats his wife and talks about his wife and serves his wife, elevates her in such a way that she is radiant with beauty, glowing even, is the picture that Paul paints. And he says, look, here's the deal, guys. When you love your wife well, when you put her first, when you treat her this way, when you do this, you're actually doing yourself a favor, fellas. Because when you love your wife well, guess what? Everybody sees it. Everybody sees, man, that is a woman well loved. And that is a solid marriage. See, Paul paints a beautiful picture for how husbands and wives should love one another in marriage. And here's one of my favorite parts of this, though. Paul goes on, when he talks about nobody abuses his own body, like, look, you know how you take care of yourself, take care of your wife, and that's important. And he says, and that's how Christ treats the church because we're part of his body. And then he says this, and I love it. He says, and this is why a man leaves his father and mother and cherishes his wife. Now, it's funny because that statement comes right after him saying, that's how Christ treats us, the church, since we're part of his body. How? By not abusing us, not mistreating us, but pampering, right? We pamper our own body. Christ pampers us. And he says, this is why a man will leave his father and mother. Why? So that he can treat his wife the way Christ treats us. That's the reason. That's the reason. It doesn't say he's going to leave his father and mother so he can get a wife that's, so good and bad. It didn't say he's going to leave his father and mother so he can get a wife that just cooks the best spaghetti and meatballs. No. He said the reason a man leaves his father and mother and becomes one flesh with his wife is so that he can love her the way Christ loves us. See, Jesus didn't step down from heaven to get something out of you and me. He stepped out of heaven to give love to you and me. And Paul is saying, and a man will leave everything in the world behind. Hear me on this. A man, not a boy, not a little lustful idiot, a man will leave his father and mother, meaning a man will step away from his entire inheritance. Because culturally back then, the woman would come and live with you and you would build on to your father's home. No. Paul is saying, just for the opportunity to love a woman the way Christ loves us, to be able to give everything he has to a woman. A man will leave everything behind to give love to her. Well, guess what? Most men won't. So what Paul is saying is, this is what a man does. And it has an underlying question to any man reading this. Are you a man? Are you a man? Are you really a man? Because a man will give up everything just so he can take care of someone else. A man will lay his life down. And there's the example, leaving father and mother. Paul is saying a real man will lay it all down, give all of it up, just to make sure she is loved. And then he says, here's my favorite part. This is a huge mystery, and I don't pretend to understand it at all. He says, and I think that's a fair statement, right? Because who says, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. Let me give up every single thing I have so I can make sure someone else feels loved. In our culture, that doesn't make sense at all. Because we're taught, put your mask on first, then help everybody else. Love yourself, then love everybody else. And Paul is saying, this is a crazy mystery, man. Jesus gave up everything with no promise of anything in return, just so he could come love us and take care of us. And that's what a real man is going to do for a wife. He's going to give up everything. He's going to be willing to lay it all down just so she feels loved. And then Paul says, and this is a huge mystery, and I don't pretend to understand it at all. But he says this, what is clearest to me is the way Christ treats the church, and this provides a good picture of how each husband is to treat his wife, loving himself in loving her, and how each wife is to honor her husband. So as we wrap it up today, here's the message we get from Paul. If you want to have a great marriage, it's outlined in Ephesians Chapter 5. Out of courtesy and respect for Christ, we need to love one another. As a husband, we need to be a man worthy of that kind of love from our wife. We need to be men who are saying and doing everything we can to make sure she knows she's number one. That God is first. We're going to follow his example of loving perfectly, loving unconditionally, regardless of the outcome. Paul is saying, you do that, husbands, and you're a man worthy of his wife's honor, love, and respect in return. And he's saying, ladies, trust him, love him, follow him, because he's following Jesus. This was pretty progressive writing in the time that Paul wrote it, and frankly, it's pretty progressive now in America. We've done a lot in our culture to destroy the marriage. There are a million things that I won't get into on this Bible study live, but I want to get into one thing, and that is this. No matter what you've been told, no matter if you came from a broken home, were raised seeing a horrible picture of relationships, how bad they are, no matter if you've been horrible in relationships in the past, maybe you're married now and you haven't loved your spouse this way now. Maybe right now you haven't given your husband or your wife the love and respect that they deserve. Maybe the words I just read you, that's not what my marriage looks like. Can I offer you some encouragement? It can start looking like that right now today. Right now today, you can make the choice to say, starting now, I'm going to lay my life down for my spouse. Starting now, I'm going to make sure that I put her or him first in everything. Starting today, I'm going to love like Jesus. That's a choice that you have the freedom to make right now. If your marriage hasn't been going the way that you want, maybe you've tried counselors, maybe you've tried Christian counselors, and maybe none of it's worked. Can I encourage you to go to the book of Ephesians Chapter 5 and read it and start where it says, out of courtesy and reverence for Christ. Out of courtesy and that's what it says in the Message in verse 21. Out of respect for Christ, be courteous and reverent to one another. Start your marriage with that. Everything I do in my marriage, I'm going to do as though I'm doing it in response to what Jesus has done for me. There is hope for your marriage, my friends. No matter how long you've been married, no matter how long you've been sleeping with your backs to each other, or sleeping in separate bedrooms, or going to sleep at different times, or maybe it's been years since you've experienced intimacy with your spouse. So maybe it's been so long you don't even feel the physical attraction to one another. Can I tell you, it is not too late to start dating your spouse again and start all over in the right way. If you're still married, there's still hope. So now is the time. If you're not married yet, Ephesians Chapter 5 is a beautiful roadmap for how to create a marriage that will last. But it all starts with being like Jesus, being one in mind and spirit with God, and what God said was the best way to love. And that was this: selflessly. There you go. There's Bible Study Live. Listen, I said at the beginning and I say at the end, if you want to score an advanced copy of our new marriage book called For This Reason, Living Ephesians 5 Marriage, we want to hook you up. Text the word love to 833-981-0002. Right now, you'll get put on a list. We'll shoot you a text message when the advanced downloadable copies are available. I'm confident you're going to love this book, and it's going to help do wonders for your marriage, especially if you and your spouse read it together as a devotional, because it's written as we break through the verses 21 through 33. Darren and I wrote these chapters completely separate to talk about how we see them as husband and wife, how we read them, and then we recap the book together to talk about how our separate views can mesh together and two can become one. And it's going to be a beautiful book for your marriage. So grab yourself the ability to score an advanced copy. Text the word love to 833-981-0002. I do these Bible study lives every Monday through Friday between 7:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. So I hope you'll mark your calendar, subscribe, and watch the next one. Listen, no matter where you're at in your relationship or your walk with God, you are just literally one moment away from walking a little closer. So would you make that choice today? If you need help, you need prayer or anything like that, feel free to reach out to me. You can message me, DM me through whatever social platform you're watching this on. My wife and I would love to pray for you. Look, if you need a Bible, if you say, man, I need a Bible. Maybe you go, I don't have one. Maybe you're watching this video at a library, at a friend's house on their computer, you're borrowing somebody's phone. You say, I'd sure love a Bible. You can drop a message to us. You can send an email to, let me just grab the email address that I want y'all to send it to, because I don't want to have you send it to the wrong one. I want to make sure that I actually get it. So you can send it to team, T-E-A-M, at forthisreason.org. That's team at forthisreason.org. You can drop an email there, just put in the subject line Bible, and in the body just put your name, address, and phone number if you live in the United States, and we'll go ahead and Amazon a Bible over to you at no cost, because we just want to help people get to know God and His love better. So send an email to team at forthisreason.org, and we will drop a Bible email to you. Listen, if you need prayer, you can also send prayer requests to team at forthisreason.org. Love you guys. I appreciate you. Now, tune in tomorrow, and we'll dig into some other fun. But as for today, go out there and make your day, and hopefully somebody else's amazing.